You are now tuned into Flipping the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
Everything's going great without Brian. Eric, how about me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Zach.
Okay.
Morgan might have to pop back in, pop back out. I imagine that he asked us how we're doing.
I'm going to say so. Probably hit us with the old Brian, welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds. We've successfully managed to kick off Brian and now Morgan, and now the ship is ours. So, Eric, how you doing?
Dude, this ship has sailed. And I'm not talking about, anything as far as the Eagles. I'm just talking about the the leadership of this podcast for tonight.
Okay, I think we did it.
Morgan's back. He's back. All right, the leadership is coming back. The ship is being docked for the moment.
I don't know why Brian puts me in charge. But all right. Episode 192 of Flipping the Birds. We are back. Without missing a beat. Don't even worry about that a little bit. I even got the intro right this time, so that's pretty good. Yeah, we are here talking
about 2 tries, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, it is what it is. There wasn't live the first time, so they don't know.
Now they do.
All right, we're talking about Eagles, Cowboys, a bit of a debacle there. Kind of a lot more negatives than positives, but we'll do our best to try and speak on some things that get you amped and get you excited about the little run that the Eagles are about to make. But initial thoughts, fellas, how are you feeling early this week? How's it sitting with you guys after watching that Sunday night football game?
Brother, I personally, I feel all right because I think, I expected it, I guess, in a lot of ways. So it's not necessarily like, a surprise where, the day after I feel like it's an overreaction. I feel like this is about right. Now, the way that it happened, by the way, is a lot different than San Francisco. We'll discuss that. But for right now, I'm thinking that, what I said, last week even, or even after the San Francisco game, so I guess it's technically last week still, would be that, they're not a clear contender for the NFC, to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. And this Dallas game here, we all kind of knew that it was going to be tough to, sweep Dallas. It's going to be tough to even win in Dallas. And I have to say, like, I just want that cycle to be broken, and man, it's rough to see it go the way it did.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, rough is is definitely one word. I was kind of sick to my stomach watching it, and a big part of the reason is because, and we've been saying this all year. It's just now they're facing stiffer competitions. The Eagles aren't playing up to their caliber. I mean, sure, there are some personnel issues on this team that you can't hide, away from that fact. That's absolute truth. But there's a lot of mismanagement going on that causes you to shoot yourself in the foot, and that's players and coaches. It's not just all Brian Johnson. It's not just all Nick Sirianni, although there's certainly a lot of blame to pass around there. But you talk about 3 key offensive playmakers: Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, and Devontae Smith, all with key turnovers. It's just a lot of guys going out there, and you got to wonder, do you really want this? Because this takes greatness, and you're not giving greatness.
And there's a lot of signs that point to that last thing that you said about this not, really, partaking in the greatness this season. Like, okay, even the like the defense, worst passing defense in the league for the most part. And the defense, by the way, is the only thing that contributes to points, on the board outside of Jake Elliott's leg. And then, but you have you have that to kind of, I guess, hang your hat on because the defensive line, at least got the Dak and forced a turnover. So you can do that, even though that's like, okay, what is that compared to the big picture? Really nothing. The big picture from that game I took away that I think, some of our players had their heads not in the game. Um, I'm, you know, definitely talking about Darius Slay. Or, I know that he gets mad when, you call him, Darius, but come on. Right now, I agree with the meme that's going around, dude. It's Darius right now.
My biggest problem. I hate to interrupt you, Eric. My biggest problem with the Darius Slay thing, since you brought it up,
Yep.
Darius Slay played pretty well overall. But
I don't disagree with that,
immediately
but
after he throws all of that away, hopping
that
on Twitter the second the game's over. I mean, it's just
that's it.
I listen. Darius Slay historically is a very good player. Again, he had a very good game against Dallas. He is not the reason why we lost. I understand being frustrated at the bogus call. I think that there is an argument to be had that the call. I mean, was the contact made? Absolutely, but
I
it's just a
agree that
matter
the
of
call is that the call was bogus. So honestly,
yeah.
like, if I'm texting it, then you know what? I'm allowed to. But you get back on the field and keep your head in the game against, the top dog rival. Like
Well,
that's
my other thing too is like say something in the locker room.
right too.
Say something the next day. Even if he came back the next day and he said something on Twitter, I still wouldn't have as big a problem with it as I do as quickly. It's the matter of how quickly he came after the. Let's not save that clip. It's a matter of how quickly he resulted to going on social media after the game. That really kind of gave me my biggest issue. So listen, Darius Slay is a social guy, and by that I mean on social media a lot, and he deals with a lot on social media. Obviously he's getting trash cans in person, but on top of that, he's getting a lot of hate online. His wife gets a lot of hate, some directed at him, some incredibly directed at her, which she's fantastic. I don't even understand how you can bring someone else's family into this issue that you have with a professional athlete that you don't know, mind you. All
Right.
that being said, just you take the field, you're going to war with your brothers. How can they feel positive about seeing you do that right after the game? And we've
That's
seen that type of
exactly it.
attitude wear off against a couple other Eagles as well.
So that's something that we had talked about actually in the last couple of weeks, kind of before the 2-game slide, is we were kind of praising that locker room for keeping everything internal and coaches being able to right the ship when the wrongs were seeming insurmountable. Do you guys feel different about that team? Do you feel the locker room has kind of reached a tipping point? Or do you think that with these kind of 2-game slides, it's bound to happen and they will right the ship? Like I think there's something different about this week where it feels like there's a plateau that's been reached where it feels like the unforgivable things were forgivable up until a couple days ago or a couple games ago, where they were getting away with a lot, and now it's kind of broken loose and things are getting out of the locker room. Do you think that this is kind of the time where we see the Eagles collapse, or do you think that this is something that can be handled?
Well, this is going to weigh heavily on, what kind of leadership Jalen Hurts, actually has versus, what we all assume based on just, his record and, what we do see on the field. I think he is a leader. He's so hard to read, though. I mean, like, hey, even half the stuff that he says, if not all of it, after post games are really like hard to decipher. Like, I don't know what he's talking about, nor do I get a direction that anything is going to change because it tells me a bunch of nothing. Then there's some ways that he reacts on the sideline, whether he threw a touchdown or he just fumbled the ball, and he kind of just looks as like, okay, I'm off that play. But is he off that play, or is he only is he stewing about it? Like, is he motivated by it? Is he does he have the like forgetful? They would very quickly a forgetful mind, like quarterbacks like have a cliche for. You don't know this about him. So yeah, this is going to be a big step forward in what is exactly Jalen Hurts' leadership. And also, the other voices in the room, if the leadership is coming directly from the offensive line, then you kind of have to wonder who's next in stepping up because that offensive line is getting old, man. And what leadership are we going to have for the future? Like, this is huge right now.
Yeah, I think when you talk about leadership in the next generation, there's definitely some there's opportunity, and until we start seeing that opportunity be fulfilled, there is a level of concern to be had. Again, there is opportunity for Jalen Hurts to step up as a leader here. Everyone talks about the proverbs that he spews after every game, and I think that there is a lot of positive to take away from that type of level-headedness. Obviously, it's not ideal to hear after back-to-back blowouts where the offense has performed piss poor, especially against Dallas. I mean, not even an offensive touchdown. Your defense outscored your offense, basically. That's insane. I mean, even the fact that let's talk about this. Like, technically, no. Like, all the points scored were by the kicker or the defense. Like, there's no impact on the scoring game by Jalen Hurts, by AJ Brown, by Devontae Smith, by all these guys. And you hear the anonymous quotes start to come out, and while they're different than what was happening with Alshon Jeffrey, I think this is not as offensive to the core of the locker room. This is something that you really have to gain control of the situation rather quickly now. Winning cures everything, and losing disrupts the locker room. So you have 4 very winnable games coming up. Ideally, you win out because that's the only hope that you really have of taking control of postseason seeding again. Whether or not they can do that, we'll see. I mean, Tommy DeVito just won a comeback game, against the Packers, who are tougher than people expected. There's no guarantee. At times Drew Lock looked playable against the 49ers. Like that, I would say at times he looked better than Jalen Hurts did against the 49ers. So there's concerns to be had with the remaining of the schedule. Kyler Murray's even playing better than he has, or better than expected coming after the injury. But with all that being said, where this has to start is with the coaches. This is where this leadership must first start. Has to start with Sirianni, and it's not just about him coaching the team. It's about him managing his coordinators as well, because this is going to take a group effort and nothing less if they're going to actually right the ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that kind of segues nicely into talking about the situation of these last 4 games and how we're feeling about the offense and the defense. But I mean, before we even get to that point, I feel like there is one positive takeaway we can take from that game and kind of season overall that gets glossed over is the special teams for the Eagles has been a lot better this year than last year. So again, it's not a minor part of the game. It's an often overlooked part of the game, but it does matter. And the special teams under Michael Clay in the second year have been way better. Fantastic. Top 5 in a lot of, categories. And so if we're looking at something, if we have to take something away from that game, that's been nice. Because the last couple of years, that hasn't been a given. And honestly, special teams, there was a while there under Chip Kelly. I think it was Dave Phipp that was the coordinator, had those boys working and moving and playing well. But since then, it's been kind of a problem area for the Eagles. So to have that consistent, it's nice. But let's kind of dive into talking about. We'll probably start with the defensive side of the ball. That's kind of what we've been talking about. But how confident? And I'll bring up the question because this is going to be a question that we're going to get a lot. Is how confident do you feel about Sean Desai and his scheme as a whole?
Just real quick before I do jump into that, because I do have some thoughts. I just wonder if David Carr is now thinking that Man should probably start over Hurts because God forbid he completes a pass. Right? Like, I mean,
He was quite loud.
I know he was quite loud, but he was still quite wrong. So I mean, whatever. Just you can be loud and wrong. It's true. But anyway, the defensive scheme overall, I've said it and I'm not really wavering for it from it at least. But I think the size scheme is pretty much Gannon's scheme, and then we're seeing the growing pains that Gannon experienced in his first years as a defensive coordinator, where I don't think Desai has the personnel to run this game, and it shows every week. It's somehow actually it's crazy that this defense is actually, in my opinion, regressed from earlier in the season, where at the beginning of the season when we were talking about how this season might go for Philadelphia, I'm thinking that the defense might progress, as the season goes along, just because you had some young players who probably just needed to learn this game. But we can talk about injuries, and I think we will, but just overall, right now, I don't think the defense gets much better than what it is, and that's unfortunate because it's quite bad, and especially in the passing game.
You know, uh, Sean Desai, I think, is getting a bit rougher go than he deserves. And I think that was never more clear than the idiot who showed up outside the Novacare complex with the fire Desai signs and the trash cans for Bradbury. I mean, listen, the run the ball thing, that was funny. That was cute. No harm, no foul. You're just a jackass for showing up with those signs to the Novacare complex. So that's it, simply put. But he's not without blame, obviously. What I will say is that I'm confident with him as the defensive coordinator going forward. I think Eric brings up some good points. I think as far as scheme, there are some similarities to Gannon. There's obviously some differences, but I think the point about the similar situation as far as not having the proper personnel, I mean, that's evident. That's clear and obvious. The one concern that I do have is what's going on with this pass rush. You're generating pressures, but you're not generating any results. And you can, point fingers all day. Is that because of the struggles in the secondary, the struggles in the linebacking core? It's a fair point. You're giving that quarterback an out, a safety valve, by having linebackers who can't cover, by having poor safeties in play. As far as how does this situation resolve, maybe it doesn't until the offseason. You have players like Nolan Smith who are very young, very raw, and maybe he contributes on a much higher level with the more playing time that he gets. Maybe one day he does get there, but for now, he's not giving you the kind of instant gratification like a Brian Branch is. Now he's not been
Right.
that type of draft selection. And can you argue, was that a mistake considering how ready this team was to contend? Maybe, but there's no point. I mean, you can revisit mock drafts of years past or pretend to redraft. I've done that with the Sixers more times than I can count. But the point is that there is no point to that activity. The roster is who it is, and you have to figure out how do you succeed with the guys that you're going to war with each and every week. So as far as the move for Desai from here on out, again, it's just about maximizing these guys and putting them in a position to succeed, which I think one thing to avoid, which I guess you have to as best as you can, is again not play guys to their strengths, obviously, and you have to know situationally when to play the younger guys. We saw Keely Ringo get a little bit more of a run against Dallas. We saw him struggle. He's very green. He's been playing almost entirely special teams this entire season. It's not a position that he's going to succeed. Even if there's a great player in there for Keely Ringo, there's just not that experience level there. So granted, there's not a whole lot of experience around. You have Eli Ricks, who's playing a lot of serious snaps. There's no corner depth effectively after Slay and Bradbury. You have Reed Blankenship, who has been your best safety, and he's in his second year. There's just not that level of experience all the way around. And even some of your other players, you bring in a Shaq Leonard, who maybe his best days are behind him, but he's a quality talent on paper, you would think. You're talking about Kevin Byard, but these are guys who are still new to the system as well. They're midseason acquisitions. So there's got to be a lot of film. There's got to be a lot of work. Nick Sirianni talked about earlier today, maybe he worked the guys a little too hard. That's why the teams looked a little bit tired. Well, if the bodies are tired, work the mind. That's what you have to do because you can't stop working. That's sure as hell true. So that's going to be true for the offense and the defense. And I think Desai is going to be the man to eventually get things back into shape. You have to take this opportunity these next 4 games and accomplish that.
Well, and it's no surprise really that we're talking about personnel. I feel like that's kind of always the division of blame as either the players or the coach. And one of the things that is just kind of unavoidable throughout the season is injuries. And it's no doubt that the Eagles have been plagued a little bit by injuries at key positions, losing both their starting linebackers at times, losing both their starting safeties at times. I guess, Byer's been healthy, but even Sidney Brown was kind of in and out. And then, Reed Blankenship, unfortunately, just can't seem to catch a break. Corners as well. Like, I don't know. It just seems to me that, like, the team is out of shape. It's not a matter of them being exhausted or, the stretch of games, which I understand, but it's just as like these are all NFL teams. You might have games like Buffalo where it's an overtime game, and obviously they're going to be a little more exhausting. But I think people put way too much on the fact that it's been 5 tough games in a row. It doesn't matter. These are NFL games, right? And the fact of the matter is that the Eagles defense looks like they're out of shape. And they are aging, but there's a lot of positions where we have youth, we have guys that are supposed to be athletic, and not that they're not athletic, but that's supposed to be what they bring to the table. And you're just not able to do that when you're exhausted and when you're hurt and when you're injured. And that to me comes in, like Zach said, with an off season, right? You got to have your strength conditioning down. It's something they've talked to, Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis about, staying in shape. And you look at Jordan Davis, he looks slimmer, and then you get through the season and he, again, just looks tired out there, right? So, you talk about kind of the little details, and there's that component mixed with the tackling, mixed with the locker room stuff. Like, it just seems like the little details that you don't expect from a professional team are starting to haunt the Eagles, which is interesting coming from a 10-3 team, right? Like that. I think that's where the issue is. It's not necessarily that there are problems. It's what the problems are. And there are little details that, again, you expect from, a losing team, a team that doesn't have a chance of sniffing the playoffs, and yet they just dropped out of a number 1 seed. So I think that's the confusing part for me. But my question, I guess, is if we do get that talent back, we start being healthy, how do you feel about this roster even going forward?
I think the roster, it could be impressive, but as far as stringing together wins into the postseason. But then again, even at that, as the roster gets healthy, the postseason draws near. The competition you're playing is not the competition that you need to measure yourself against. So we're not going to know until the postseason, and that's a little bit of an intimidating thought, because the last taste that left in your mouth wasn't just a close loss, just like how a lot of our wins were close wins. It was a decisive loss, both times, against teams that were going to be technically the 1-2 gauntlet going into the Super Bowl. So yeah, I mean, I don't really know, you know, how I feel about the roster and it getting healthy going forward, because in my mind, like, I know we're going to have Mookie on in a few minutes to talk about the Seahawks and the Eagles game coming up this week. In my mind, in my head, I think I automatically discount a backup quarterback, and we were just talking about, and I saw the same thing, that how he actually looked playable against San Francisco. And I think in my mind I discount it, but I also, like, am learning right now in a way that I've watched this defense, that it doesn't really seem at any point when the roster was healthy that the secondary or the passing defense was doing well. And to me, that's terrifying, because it's just, do we have an answer even when this roster does get healthy? The offense has been healthy, and the offense has still been, pretty much held under regard. I mean, I think the offense is underachieved, and I know everybody will sit there and say, total offense numbers this and blah 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 elite. But I mean, on the field, does it translate, week to week and win to win against quality teams that, though, in your heart that you're going to have to test your mettle against to get to the Super Bowl? Um, we're not going to know that answer until the time comes, because I don't think we're being tried in the same ways on the way there.
Yeah, I think that there's a point definitely there as far as like taking everything that you see now in these next 4 games with a grain of salt. I think what is really important is about regaining that confidence in the offense. It's kind of like, beating up on a much softer team ahead of the start of the season. to kind of get your engines going to tune-up game. It's basically going to be like that over these next 4 games. While they're all important for you to win, it's important that you establish offensive dominance. Is the thing, because not only is it important for getting the play calling correct and figuring that side of everything out, but more importantly, you want to get this confidence back in this offense. You want guys like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith and Jalen Hurts to all be back on the same page. You want guys like DeAndre Swift to understand his role, which has been very spotty, especially in recent weeks. You want this offensive line to be confident that if they are busting their asses blocking, that the guy behind them is actually going to get the ball out, within like 5 seconds. Because it's been crazy sometimes, and it's not all Hurts' fault that some of these plays have been extended by him not throwing the ball. Because you look at the game against San Francisco, for instance, there's nobody open. And part of the reason is San Francisco did a very good job defensively. Part of it is a lack of offensive creation, in the schemes, routes. And a big part of it is the lack of flow in the offense. So it really starts there, setting it straight. Make sure that you iron out the script tight for the first drive for the next game against Seattle. You're really going to need to start off on the right foot. If the Eagles were to win the toss, and I were Sirianni, I would seriously consider not deferring and accepting the ball to start the game, which I know is not his MO, but you have to, again, assert your dominance and reinstill some confidence in this offense.
Again, great segue, Zach. I should just let you do this because we're going to talk now.
I'm pretty talented, Morgan. I don't know if you can tell.
It's like you do this. But we're going to bring on Mookie Alexander from fieldgoals.com, and obviously a Seahawks writer and a person that we're very excited to have on to talk about the Seahawks and what could be a very important game for both teams. Just coming off we feel you because the 49ers do this to a lot of teams. A tough loss against the 49ers where, they were without Geno Smith, without DK for a big portion of the game. And honestly, only lost by 12. So there's some solace in that. But how are you feeling about the Seahawks and going into this game? How do you feel about the matchup between them and the Eagles?
Well, I feel a little bit encouraged by the offense because Drew Lock ended up playing a little bit better than I think many had anticipated, because his relief stint against the Rams was a complete disaster. Got no first downs through an interception that led to the game-winning field goal. But against San Francisco, he looked calm. He looked like he was composed and knew how to run the offense. And the turnovers were, of course, one, he got his arm hit, and I don't really care about that. And then the other one, which was a bad throw to Metcalf in triple coverage. And that's kind of been the MO of his career, where he'll make some really nice plays. And also he's just going to have a Jay Cutler gene in him where he's just got to fling it to a guy who's extremely not open. And he almost got picked on the second pass of the game, throwing to a double cover Jackson Smith and Jigba. So he is a gunslinger, a prototypical gunslinger, I guess you could say. But he's not a Josh Allen type of gunslinger in that he's not, a franchise quarterback. But even before Drew started for Geno had arguably one of his best games ever as a Seahawk against the Cowboys. I mean, that's a pretty good defense that the Cowboys have, and Seattle was able to get 35 points on them, and Geno absolutely ripped them apart. Unfortunately, the offensive line and a couple of miscommunications cost them at the end. So I can see some signs of life in the passing game, particularly DK Metcalf getting 4 touchdowns over the last 2 games. He's hitting those explosive plays again. Jackson Smith and Jigba has been really good since the bye week. Didn't have his best game against San Francisco, but still, he is a more steady feature in this offense. Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet are both available again because Charbonnet's been playing in place of the injured Walker. Now Walker's back in the lineup. The defense, yeah, that's a different story. I did not anticipate that. I anticipated Seattle's defense wouldn't be very good this year. I didn't think that they would be pretty much the worst unit that Pete Carroll's ever put out. And I also didn't think that the Eagles defense would also be in the bottom 10. So this could be an unexpected shootout the way that both units are playing. But this defense has been absolutely awful since about early November, even late October, because they got 3 turnovers against the Cleveland Browns and held them to 20 points. But that's PJ Walker starting at quarterback, and the Browns had almost 400 yards of offense. So since week 9, so we'll start with the Ravens game and get to this past weekend against the Niners. They're last or close to last in almost every metric: yards, points, expected points added, DVOA. If simple or advanced, they've just been poor, and that to me is really wrecking this season because the Seahawks offense has underperformed. It was supposed to be a top 10 unit, but I think there are more valid excuses for the offense. A lot of injuries on the offensive line. They went more than half the season. They've been missing multiple starters on the O line. The play calling has been a bit of a question. There have been some miscommunications and receivers running wrong routes. So some of it is just bad coaching and bad play by the players. And then Geno Smith has been banged up. Of course, he just missed this game. He might miss the Philly game. He had the elbow injury. He had the knee thing against the Giants. So it's not gone according to plan on the offensive side of the ball. The defense has been much healthier, and they're basically as bad as they were last year and actually statistically worse. So the Eagles is an interesting matchup because this is probably the one game on the schedule I thought this might be winnable for Seattle, and not for the reasons that I thought. The defense of Philly is so vulnerable, especially to giving up explosive plays, which is what the Seahawks love to hunt on offense, that this could be the type of matchup where they're going to look for shot plays to Metcalf or shot plays to Smith and Jigba, or work the intermediate with Lockett and the tight ends, and basically try to stress Philadelphia's defense in ways that they have been stressed over the past few weeks.
And do you think that's more so based on Locke, probably, being a new starter, or is that based on, sort of kind of having your mind made up on like who the playmaker is and kind of relying on that playmaker because your offensive line isn't giving you a ton of time, and that might actually dictate the way that you attack the defense. If you are in a passing situation, you might not have time to go through your read. So if your primary is that deep threat, I mean, you're chucking it into triple coverage anyhow. You might as well. It's is it more so a gunslinger, or is it more so like I don't have time? Like is it by design, or is it Locke going, oh crap, I need to get this ball out of here? I have DK.
Yeah, well, in Locke's case, I think whether he has time or not, he is willing to just chuck it up. But
Fair.
the point about the lack of time is real because when Geno played against the Cowboys, he was not sacked one time, which is really impressive. So impressive. Micah Parsons ended up writing it up on social media, but he was pressured on 54% of his dropbacks, which is absolutely nuts. So he had to get the ball out of his hands, something that he'd been having trouble with in previous weeks where he was holding it a count too long and he was taking some bad sacks as a result. Locke took 4 sacks, but the offensive line held up a little better than I thought. But most of those sacks were not humongous losses or anything. But yes, they're going to have to rely on a lot of things to still slow down the Eagles' pass rush because as much as the Eagles are struggling defensively, I don't think it's because Hassan Reddick and Fletcher Cox and Joe, I don't think they all just became bad players. It seems to me that Philadelphia's issue, different linebackers than last year and much worse safety play than last season as well. So for Seattle, I think they're going to have to continue to rely on getting the ball out as quickly as possible, regardless of who's starting at quarterback, and utilize play action a lot to slow down the pass rush and just put the linebackers in conflict and try and get their shot plays there. Where Seattle can't be against that Philadelphia team is an obvious passing situation because the Eagles' third down defense is shockingly poor. So is Seattle. So we're in good luck as far as our respective teams wanting to win. But Seattle's third down offense is terrible, and they tend to just completely collapse when they're put into obvious third down passing situations. And even though the Eagles' third down defense has been a problem, I don't want to be in a situation if I'm Seattle where it's 3rd and 8 and Geno or Locke is dropping back, and the Eagles are going to send pressure and the offensive line's not going to be able to hold up. So that's my number one concern entering this game is, again, the Eagles' defense has underperformed, but that front four is still absolutely lethal, and Seattle has not pass protected well for much of the season.
Would you rank maybe a worry about getting the offensive, like as far as the offensive line getting a push, because you were talking about how they were banged up, but now you got 2 healthy running backs. Do you think that the offensive line kind of negates having 2 healthy running backs in that situation? Because the Philadelphia Eagles, for what their defense is worth, obviously the strength is at the defensive line. It sounds like with it does kind of sound like even with the offensive line and having 2 healthy running backs that you guys aren't getting necessarily an advantage or a strength out of that matchup.
Yeah, it's been hard for Seattle to consistently get the run game going. Their number of running plays of at least 10 yards, they've only got 34. And you take away 4 from Geno Smith, the running backs, you got 15 out of Zach Charbonnet and 13 out of Kenneth Walker. And Charbonnet's had fewer carries than Walker, so that's something to keep in mind. So the rate of 10-yard running plays is like kind of somewhere in the middle of the pack because they don't run the ball a lot. Some of it is game script and other parts is just the way that the offense is operating. But particularly in the red zone is where Seattle struggles. Their running game in the red zone is just wildly ineffective. They're close to the bottom, I believe, in terms of red zone running rates and as far as getting any positive yards. It's kind of crazy because most of their rushing touchdowns, I think all of their touchdowns on the ground have been in the red zone. But outside of that, it's very common for them to just lose yards, no gain. And that's generally when the offensive line is just not getting that push. They're not getting the push up front. They certainly can't do any tush push, that's for sure. And that's just been a hindrance to Seattle's offense because it's a very basic running game system. They don't deviate too much from the scripts. The types of run concepts that they have compared to, say, Miami are just so limited. And Seattle does not have a lot of receivers who are also serious running threats. Like DK Metcalf, you'd think would be a running threat. But the problem is the way that he runs, you can't really do jet sweeps with him because he takes a while to turn a corner. He's like Usain Bolt in that sense, in that Bolt's in a 60 meters, probably doesn't beat guys who excel as 60-meter specialists. But after 60 meters, Usain Bolt's won the race already. That's kind of the same thing with DK. He takes a while to get going, so you can't run certain plays with him. And then Tyler Lockett has long since his days as a serious running threat have basically gone since he broke his leg several years ago. And Jackson Smith and Jigba is quick, but not overly fast. And then Jake Bobo, he of the famous 4.99 40-yard dash. He actually has a rushing touchdown. It was like a 2-yard goal line play. So there are not a lot of options for Seattle as far as diversifying the running attack compared to, say, Philadelphia, where you have the threat with Hurts as a read option keeper. You have the threat with quarterback draw, which seems to be the default play on second down, it seems, for the Eagles, watching them the last few weeks. And then you have DeAndre Swift and Boston Scott and Kenneth Gainwell. So there are so many different ways that you can attack Seattle's defense from Philly's side compared to the other way around. So, yeah, the running game for Seattle really has to show up, I think, for the Seahawks to have a chance because they really need other ways beyond just getting the ball out quickly to slow down that Eagles defensive front.
Yeah, Mookie, moving on to the passing game for Seattle real quick. You mentioned DK Metcalf. Kyle Shanahan, 49ers head coach, came out to discuss how basically they got the result that they hoped for with Metcalf getting a bit frustrated, eventually being kicked out of the game. Is that something that I guess the best way to phrase this question is, do you think that's going to have a lingering effect for DK? Is he going to be effectively out to have a monster game after leaving the game outside of his own accord this past week?
Well, it's funny because Jim Schwartz isn't your defensive coordinator anymore. So we remember that the last 2 times that the Seahawks have played Philadelphia, DK just turned into prime Calvin Johnson on the Eagles. And obviously the Eagles took a very different wide receiver who I believe is not in the NFL anymore, Arcega-Whiteside, and that's kind of been a running theme. But for Metcalf, yes, he does tend to lose his temper in games. And on this occasion, I can actually defend him because he suplexed Fred Warner on the interception, and Warner lateraled the ball to Dre Greenlaw, but Metcalf was none the wiser that he lateraled the ball. And then after Metcalf got up, Fred Warner shoved him in the back, and that's nowhere near the play. And that led to Metcalf grabbing Warner's face mask, and then all the brouhaha happened. Big Dom, unfortunately, was not there to help break up anything or a Big Dom equivalent. But it is a problem for Metcalf that he gets penalized a lot. In this instance, I didn't mind because there was a retaliation. So it's and the game was just about over. So that's one of the few times I don't mind him getting steamed, but he can cost the team at times when he just is overly aggressive with his blocking or if he gets goaded into something. I'm glad CJ Gardner-Johnson's not on the Eagles anymore because, that would have been a real problem with those two against each other. But Darius Slay, for example, I think Slay is capable of getting into DK's head. And Darius might be looking for revenge because he was the one who got pretty much lit up in the 2020 meeting. So Metcalf is still, despite everything I said with his propensity to get fined and commit some penalties, he's still been a very good receiver and at times great for the Seahawks throughout his career. And this season hasn't been his most effective, hasn't been his most efficient, but he is still a dangerous threat after the catch. He's worked on his hands. He only has 3 drops on the year. And I think Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, is starting to move him around a little bit better. He's been typecast too much as the guy who you take a deep shot towards on the sideline. But if you get him close on slants and use him in the middle of the field, get him on crossing routes, that's a better way to utilize Metcalf and getting him out into space. So I think that the Seahawks are going to try and look for mismatches to maybe get Metcalf off of Philly's corners, get him away from Slade, get him away from Bradbury, get him into some more favorable matchups. And that's where Locke or Gino can just rip it to him and let him try and do some damage.
It's interesting. I think that although the records are very different, the Seahawks and Eagles are kind of having similar issues where, in kind of on my own analysis and I was talking about the Seahawks, but also just kind of listening to you talk about them, seems to be one throughout the season, a problem with inconsistency. And some games is going to be your offense, some games is going to be your defense. You have some games that are gritty games, whether they're wins or losses, Detroit, the Browns, Washington as well. And then you also have some games like the Baltimore game, right, where it just didn't seem like a contest. And on the similar side, the Eagles, the 49ers and the Cowboys games, like it just wasn't competitive. And so the consistency is an issue. But even going beyond that, like it's weird to hear about a Seattle team that's not really consistent running the football and doesn't play hard-nosed defense. And then in the Eagles, the same thing. Like it's weird to see an Eagles team where at some points the offensive line was an issue and the defensive line hasn't been getting the pressure that we're expecting and sacking the quarterback. So how do you feel about, one, the inconsistency about Seattle? Is there one thing that kind of sticks out? And two, how do you feel about the identity of this team kind of going forward?
As far as the inconsistencies, the defense, I thought they were turning a corner at the start of the year because, of course, they were just taking turns sacking Daniel Jones and again in the Giants game, and they looked pretty good against the Cincinnati Bengals, even in a loss. They held Joe Burrow and company to like 2 first downs or 3 first downs in the second half. They shut down the Arizona Cardinals. But now we've got enough of a sample size to know the Giants, at least with Daniel Jones, aren't any good. He's no Tommy DeVito. And then the Arizona Cardinals with Josh Dobbs at quarterback, they're still just not a good team. Seattle essentially beat up on some bad opposition, Carolina and the Giants, and you get the picture. Whereas against slightly tougher competition, they were terrible against the Rams in the first game. They still gave up 31 against Detroit. And I think there might have been a bit of a mirage schedule-wise. And to me, what's maddening about this defense, and I've mentioned this many times before, they're the second most expensive defense in the NFL in terms of cash spent for 2023. And the results have just been very underwhelming. And the secondary, to me, the cornerbacks are impressive. Trey Brown, Devin Witherspoon, and Reek Woolen, they're really good corners, even if Woolen at the very least has got a problem with penalties and coverage busts in zone assignments. They've been one of the bright spots of this group. But the safety play, Jamal Adams, he's been a lightning rod of criticism among Seahawks fans, and now even on a broader scale with his behavior on social media over the last week or so. And he got singled out by Pete Carroll on Monday's radio show because he had a coverage bust on a 3rd and long that led to a 54-yard touchdown to Deebo Samuel. I mean, he's playing a route that's short of the first down and gave up something big over the top. And Carroll was saying, this is something that we practice. You just can't have that type of mistake. So the safety play has been disappointing from Adams. Quandre Diggs, it feels like, unfortunately for him, he has been tasked as the last line of defense way too much. And open field tackling has not been a strength of his. It's certainly not this season. So it looks uglier for Diggs than it's actually been all season. Linebacker play, Bobby Wagner. I love Bobby, future Hall of Famer. He's not the same Bobby Wagner that he was in 2012, 2013. Run defense, he's still good, but he could still get washed out of plays. And then in pass coverage, he just can't really hold up in pass coverage as much these days. Jordan Brooks, he's been good, but keep in mind he tore his ACL in January. And he's played every game this season. So it's incredible what he's done. And then the pass rush has been inconsistent yet again. And that's just a total flip from what we have been accustomed to seeing with Seahawks football and the Legion of Boom years, and even a couple years after the Legion of Boom dissolved. So the defense as a whole, they're too expensive to be this bad. And then on the offensive side of the ball, the inconsistency is a little more explainable with the aforementioned injuries. The quarterback play, Geno Smith has not been as good as he was last year. He's been kind of hovering around average. And then the running game has suffered because of all the offensive line inconsistencies. But the overhanging thing for me with the Seahawks is that they don't look particularly well coached. They commit so many penalties. They're having so many coverage breakdowns and missed assignments on the defensive side of the ball. Some blocks not being picked up on offense, or two receivers are in the same area and you got weird spacing. There is talent on this team, plenty of talent on both sides of the ball. Not to the point where I'm thinking they should be a Super Bowl contender or anything, but they're not a bottom of the barrel unit. They're not the Carolina Panthers, but they play too much like a bottom 10 team. And I would point a lot of my frustrations with this particular season on the coaching staff. And I know somebody in the chat had mentioned Sean Desai like this in Seattle. I don't think so, but the defense wasn't good in Seattle last year either. So that my surprise of Desai being a big name for the defensive coordinator spot is almost entirely because of his ties with Vic Fangio, not necessarily anything he did with the Seahawks as an assistant head coach.
And one of the things that kind of strikes me about the Vic Fangio connection there is, I mean, I've spent a long time watching his defenses just kind of crumble when it mattered the most. So that doesn't sit right with me. But again, you're dead on. So.
Yes, and Seattle's been trying to run a Fangio type of scheme the last 2 years to not great success. And I think Vic Fangio is a very good defensive coordinator, but his imitators have not been impressive. I think of Brandon Staley right now with the Chargers, and he is very close to the unemployment line. That defense is dismal, and it's been there. It's been dismal every season he's been there, and that's with two outstanding pass rushers in his front four. So Fangio, even he just had a historic blown lead on Monday night. So there might be something schematic that kind of invites that you will give up 5, 10 yards, 15 yards at a time, as long as you don't give up something that's 40 or 50. But there is an unintended consequence when it comes to late game situations where, yeah, that's exactly the type of plays you want in 2-minute drills. As long as I'm moving forward, I don't care about the explosive plays unless I'm pressed for time.
Yep, and allows guys to build confidence, get hot. Something that, I mean, really the Eagles offense could stand to play a Vic Fangio defense right about now and try and get back some of that confidence. But, it's definitely going to be tough this Sunday. Have you heard anything yet as far as which quarterback will be starting for Seattle? I know you've mentioned a lot of, both quarterbacks' names so far. Who are you expecting to suit up?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the game's on Monday since we got flexed to Monday night.
That's right. We got flexed.
Right, yeah.
That's the stupidest thing. Which after I want to hear what you have to say about the quarterbacks, but I really want us to talk about that after, because it's just
personally, I'm hoping the Eagles think that the game is still on Sunday, and then Monday just becomes a win by forfeits. But it's unlikely. I believe they have calendars. But yes, as far as the quarterbacks,
they have a La Terrain watch.
They do have a La Terrain watch. Watch FTB for 25% off your La Terrain watch. Don't miss the game with a La Terrain watch.
That
was awesome.
Is the perfect segue. Perfect segue, perfect plug. Anyway, as far as the quarterbacks, we're still in limbo because, of course, this game's on a Monday. Seattle's not going to practice until Thursday. What Geno's injury was termed, according to Adam Schefter, was a 2-week recovery. And he got injured on Thursday when he apparently tripped over a defensive player and took an awkward step. That's the type of injury it sounds like they would get in baseball or something. But whatever the case, he was able to run around apparently in warm-ups and throw, but apparently Geno couldn't push off in one direction. And that's why they just held him out. And it's probably best to hold him out against that defense when you just got injured 3 days ago. But with a little extra rest and some reps, I suspect that both Locke and Smith are going to be practicing with the first team. I don't think they're going to hold out Smith entirely. I think he's going to try and play, but we won't really know anything definitive until Thursday. But Pete Carroll seems comfortable in letting Locke start in case Geno can't go. But with their backs against the wall, and the gift that they got with the Giants beating the Packers, I think that they're going to have Geno Smith start, but with the caveats that if he doesn't look 100%, they shouldn't hesitate to go right back to Locke.
Yeah, well, you can't hold anything back at this stage in the game. But we talked about the flex. Let's get your honest opinion. Flexing is obviously nothing new in the NFL. People have had differing opinions on flexing in general. Just thinking of from a fan perspective, people who have to go to the game, people who are watching it at home. There's always been that kind of dialogue before, but now this year they switched the day of the game for the first time. So moving it from Sunday to Monday night. What is your feeling on the matter? Is it positive? Are you on that kind of similar? Hey, some people kind of have to get to work. Maybe we shouldn't be moving this to a Monday night. What's your stance on it overall, Mookie?
Yeah, I'm fine with flexing games, but from the standpoint of being a fan, if you're going to the game, it's a pretty awful thing that the NFL does. But the NFL is first and foremost a television product. They don't have a multi-billion-dollar contract because of 60,000 people in the stadium. They have a multi-billion-dollar contract because of 20 to 30 million people watching the lead Fox or CBS game or Sunday Night Football game every week. So they're catering to the networks over the needs of the fans, because I just imagine how many Eagles fans, in fact, I might have read a story about some Eagles fans, a group of Eagles fans who realized that they couldn't make, once the game got flexed to Monday, suddenly they got to change their flight schedule and hotel schedule and all that. And even if you have 2 weeks in advance, I mean, you're scrambling. And at this time of the year, the holiday season, that's even worse, because those airfares are going to go up. You're going to have a lot more people coming into town and going out of town. So it's a really unfortunate situation from a fan perspective. But in terms of the primetime schedule, if it's a television product, I think the NFL is compelled to maybe tweak this flex scheduling thing a little bit more. My suggestion for at least the Thursday night games is, if you're going to use Thursday night football flexing, then like that last Thursday of the season, just have it listed as to be determined. Because from what I understand, like in European soccer and like in the English Premier League, they will flex games per se to a certain time slot, whether Saturday morning or Sunday afternoon, whatever, Monday night. But that will also be well in advance, but with the knowledge that, hey, this game could be moved. Maybe they should just pick, certain dates towards the end of the year where we're not filling in a game yet, and have certain games on the schedule in April or May, or whenever the schedule release is, and go, hey, we don't have a set kickoff time for this yet. That way there's no disappointment when the game gets moved. That's what they did for these Saturday games, like the Pittsburgh Colts game and Denver, Detroit. They didn't have set kickoff times. It was a case of, hey, we're keeping this in mind. But the way the NFL does it kind of lends itself to scrutiny. I don't think people want to see the Patriots on national TV anymore. So the NFL is in conflict. I think another option would be just put the Chiefs Patriots, keep it on Monday, but let it go to the local Fox or CBS affiliate. That way you keep the time slot and it just goes to their local markets, as opposed to moving in games into a whole nother day. I mean, it's not an easy thing, but I very much understand why fans do not like the Sunday to Monday flex as opposed to Sunday 1 o'clock to Sunday Night Football.
Now I have another question to ask you about another controversial opinion. You being a non-Eagles content creator, writer, even maybe fan, what is your unbiased opinion on the brotherly shove?
I don't really believe that they should ban the play. I don't see evidence that the brotherly shove causes any more injurious play than just a standard quarterback sneak. Heck, Patrick Mahomes has stopped quarterback sneaking because he had his ankle tweaked on a regular sneak. So if we're going to take the brotherly shove out of the game because the Eagles are so good at it, that's what it feels like. They're using the guise of, one team might get more, teams are going to get injured just trying to copy this. Well, maybe you're not doing it right. The Eagles seem to have the personnel for it. That's a lot different than, say, looking at horse collar tackles or whatever, this hip drop tackle controversy where we are seeing people get injured. I mean, this brotherly shove, I don't see many defensive players getting injured. How many times have we watched the brotherly shove in Eagles games and either defensive player or offensive player gets hurt as a result? I mean, if you're going to try and take the brotherly shove out of the game, you're going to have to take a really hard look at sneaks in general.
Right.
And I think it's just a low percentage of injury. It is a sea of humanity. It's not a pretty looking play, but it works. I mean, it's not that much different from a rugby scrum.
No, you're right, and that's exactly it. Like they just found a way to not even reinvent the wheel, but literally tweak the wheel because you've already said the sneak exists, so this is just a harder sneak. It's really what it is at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a harder sneak, but with great efficiency. And if the Eagles put in 5 backup offensive linemen, then the tush push probably doesn't work as well. But you have Lane Johnson and Jason Kelsey. You've got multiple future Hall of Fame and all pro level offensive linemen who are really good at this. And then they've practiced it. And it's not like the Eagles just started doing it this year. They've been doing this for basically since Hurts got into the league, and certainly did it quite a bit last year. The hubbub, I guess, is just that, hey, it works too well and it's unstoppable. Well, you can try and stop it.
Mm. Well, I mean, the thing that everyone seems to bring up is how good Jason Kelsey is at it, but everyone compares it to this rugby scrum. And there's one other thing the Eagles have on their offensive line that no other team has on their offensive line, and that's a former professional rugby player. And that gets so overlooked. Is Jordan Mailata probably just taught them all this, to be honest. Like, I feel like that, they're going, oh, it's Jeff Stelling. Like, you have a former rugby player, and it looks like a rugby scrum. If it quacks like a duck, it probably is. Like, that's all I'm saying is, I think it's more to it than just, being good at it. Is like, this is a special technique. The Eagles are good at it. Watch film in the offseason. I'm sure all the teams will be doing it. Like, I don't see that. I see your point too with the injuries. Like, it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. But getting to the point of the show now, Eric's favorite time of the show. We keep talking about having a theme song for it, but we'll have to make one. But predictions time. You're the guest, so we don't make you go first. But if you'd like to go first, you have the honor. Just give us your prediction on how the game would go, maybe some key matchups we can look out for, and what you think the final score will be.
So, like I said, I think that the Seahawks have a real shot to win this. They're at home because, these last 2 games have been in difficult road environments where the Niners haven't lost at home and Dallas hasn't lost at home. The Niners have lost once at home, but Dallas is still undefeated at home. So in their home confines, it should be an amped-up atmosphere, backs against the wall. I don't think Pete Carroll's team is just going to give in. But I still think that the Eagles are a better team. They're just having a rough spell, and it's been pointed out that you guys have had just as hard a schedule as Seattle, and in fact, much harder. You're playing Kansas City, Buffalo, Dallas, and San Francisco over a 4-week span, such that Seattle, it's still a step down. It's not an easy game, but it's a lot different than playing 3 Super Bowl contenders or 3 playoff contenders, and maybe Buffalo is in the middle of a season-saving run here. So I think that the Seahawks are going to come out, make an early statement, try and hit some big plays down the field, and they're really good at getting opening drive touchdowns. They're one of the best in the league at scoring on opening drives. The problem is they're also one of the worst in the league at scoring on opening drive as far as defending opening drives. So I think one of you had mentioned, might have been you, Morgan, that if Sirianni wins the coin toss, don't defer. Yeah, just to take the ball first, because the Seahawks have given up 6 opening drive touchdowns this season. So I think that it's going to come down to the latter stages of the fourth quarter. And I believe that Jalen Hurts is just going to make 1 or 2 more key plays than whoever's the quarterback for the Seahawks. And it'll come down to Seattle being unable to stop a Hurts player, being unable to stop A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith or Dallas Goedert. I think Dallas Goedert's a huge return for Philadelphia, and that may kickstart the offense towards the easier parts of the schedule. And I think the Eagles take it maybe 20, 27, 24, something like that. It's going to be an exciting game. I think that whoever's at quarterback, they're going to have some good moments for the Seahawks. If it's Geno, he'll hit some big plays with Metcalf, Lockett, or Smith and Jigba. We'll see some nice runs from Walker and Charbonnet. But on the defensive side of the ball, they're just so disjointed that it's hard to really have much confidence in them to consistently stop Hurts. In fact, the Eagles are, if anything, they might be prone to stopping themselves with some of the play calling that I've seen. But in terms of just the talent advantage, the Eagles have got a great wide receiver duo, and DeAndre Swift has been a good running back, and Jalen Hurts, even though he's been prone to some turnovers, he's not a great style matchup for the Seahawks right now. So I don't think the pass rush can get to Hurts in ways that Dallas and San Francisco did, and I don't think the coverage can hold up as well, such that if Hurts has to drift back out of the pocket, the pass rush is just going to cover sack him. So I'm going with the Philadelphia win, not a homer. Wouldn't be shocked if Seattle won, but I think Philadelphia is just going to scrape by in this one. And that would just about, to me, give them odds-on chances to lock the NFC East up as a result.
All right, fine. I'll say things, not the thing this time around. Unfortunately for Duck, said it last week and it didn't really work out. So I think it's kind of wore out its welcome at this point. Um, so right out the gate, the score that I'm going to roll with is 27-20 Philadelphia. And the reason why I'm going to roll with that is because I do see if there's a battle of like where a strength and a weakness may be, I'm going to trust the Eagles' defensive line every single time, and vice versa with the offensive line. I have no reason to get away from really the strength is the offense as long as they can execute and hold on to that dang football. But as far as the defense is concerned, we're going to give up big plays. They're going to be there. But you brought up a very good point about Goddard. Goddard is definitely going to be a matchup. But again, I think I honestly think that you're going to see Will Disley rumble and tumble down probably 30 yards, and we're going to go like, oh my god, how did that happen? And then that's going to open up. We're going to be susceptible. We're going to play deep, and then that's where you're going to get your if at any point the running game will then start. I don't think it will be for a long time, but it will at least start up for a little bit. And hey, if you can kind of sneak some plays in like that, I'm never going to discount another team. But Philadelphia, if there's a chance to get it right, or at least something resembling progress, it's this week while you have 3 more games before you enter that postseason. So yeah, 27-20, I don't think is a shocking, I guess, deficit for or spread, if you will, for a win. I don't think it's one where it's discrediting the Eagles on defense or on offense. I just think that this is a game where not everything's going to go right because are going to eventually shoot ourselves in the foot too, and it's going to be a mix of the growing pains that we've seen for the last 10 weeks, and the game now for Philadelphia is how quickly can you eliminate that?
Yeah, I think kind of along the line of what you've both said so far, this game is it's going to be closer than I think Eagles fans are going to want. I do think Philadelphia comes out on top in the end, but there's a lot of opportunity here for Seattle. And you look at a guy like DK Metcalf. I mean, if you're not hitting that anytime touchdown button for Monday night's game, I mean, I think you're losing money at that point. Noah Fant's actually a guy I think could have a half decent game as well, considering the Eagles are horrendous against tight ends, and he especially I would say if Locke is the quarterback under center, I do expect Fant to have a half decent game himself. But Kenneth Walker definitely going to have a nice rebounding game, I'm sure, after a rough welcome back against San Francisco. That's probably about as tough of a team for a running back to face after an injury as possible. But all that being said, I do think that Philadelphia does come out on top. I think a big part of it is, again, reestablishing that offense. And Mookie, you haven't really dissuaded me on this, but against Seattle's defense, I do think that they have a chance to do a little bit of right here. But again, I do think that it is going to be close. So I'm feeling the Eagles 31-27.
Okay, and before I go, a quick shout out to Brian, who couldn't join us, but his prediction right here: Eagles 28, Seahawks 24. Also has the Giants winning, because that's his favorite team.
He is currently at the parade for Tommy DeVito's win over the Packers.
He's ordered some meatballs and having a day of it. So, yeah, exactly. I think first and foremost, I think this is the game where the offense might get it together. I have a hard time kind of picturing how the defense gets it together against the Seahawks. I think there's an issue here with both quarterbacks. Is Geno? I think if Geno's in, the Seahawks, and Mookie's talked about the coaching, but I think this coaching staff's smart enough to figure out that your offensive line doesn't stand a chance if you hold onto the football. So they're going to scheme ways to get the ball to Geno's hands early and often. And we've just seen the Eagles struggle time and time again when the ball comes out early. They play soft coverage. They have old corners that can't break the way they used to, and you have to tackle a guy like DK Metcalf, and the tackling over the last couple of games has been absolutely horrendous. So I just don't see this being the game where the defense kind of gets it together. I think they may contain This offense, I think the one kind of shimmer of hope is the red zone defense. They have been much better in the past, not necessarily the last 2 games, but again, against San Francisco, they didn't really have to get into the red zone. They just scored explosive plays. And then against Dallas, it was kind of similar. So I think there is some solace in that red zone defense. I think they can figure it out. And I think it's going to be, again, just the battle of the trenches. I think the Eagles are just much better up front. But on offense, I think there's so many kind of parts coming together. You're not going to see another game where Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith fumble the football. Like, it's just not going to happen that often. I think that the offense actually looked quite a bit better against the Cowboys than people let on. Again, it's hard not to score a touchdown, but it's also hard to fumble 3 times. Other than that, they're driving. They're looking good against what is a very good Dallas defense. I think that's flying under the radar as well. That might be a championship-winning defense. I hate to give the Cowboys credit, but they are really solid on that side of the ball. So I think what I'm going to go with prediction-wise is similar to that score that Seattle played against Dallas. I think it's going to be a very similar game, and I'm going to go 34-31 Eagles. Again, I just think the up front, the front 7 of the Eagles rushing the passer, and then the offensive line moving the rock. I hope the run game gets going. I hope that's why we win, but I think the Eagles kind of find a way. Eric, you got to...
Just real quick, what is the opportunity that Rashad Penny even sees the field against his former team?
I think he's
what's
the
less
new
than
Boston
0?
Scott, I think he's the new
What's
Boston
less than
Scott.
0, negative 1?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay,
Rashad
fair.
Penny game. So there you go. It'll be 106-0. That's what 500 rushing yards. That's what we're hoping for. But Mookie, thank you so much for coming on. Please, for our guests that don't already know of you, please shout out where they can find you on all your platforms and where they can find your work.
Well, you can find me on social media, on Twitter at Mookie Alexander. I also run the Field Goals account, so at Field Goals, and my writing is over at fieldgoals.com. So here's to a really well played, entertaining game. No injuries, because that's kind of been a problem for the Seahawks and the Eagles at times this season. So just hoping for a great atmosphere. And it's a shame that I think we've maxed out on our throwbacks, both of ours.
Mm-hmm.
This would have been the perfect
combo.
The old green Eagles jerseys and the Seahawks blue 1990s throwbacks. That would have been a pristine matchup in the primetime lights, but it's not meant to be. Maybe another time. Yeah,
I agree. Well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily work this week because they're both Birds teams. So we're gonna have to figure out something else maybe for this week and for the Cardinals week. But thanks for joining us, episode 192 of Flipping the Birds, and go Birds.
Go Birds!
Go Birds!
There we go. Outro?
I'm Morgan can find the button.
No, I'm doing it.
Here comes the outro.
I'm getting it done, man. And then we go outro.
Flip.